Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today at your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about one of my favourite subjects, the status of the law, application of the law, practice of the law, jurisprudence in the Western world. And what sort of got me onto this is having lunch with a bunch of people, and one of them was a judge, and he was just talking sort of generically about some of the things that are going on without naming names. He's very careful, this judge, not to name names or to disclose confidentialities, I guess. But when it comes to certain things, he likes to talk about, because he thinks he's virtue signaling. So it tends to come out, particularly in those sort of situations. Now, he's been involved in a number of cases, this judge has been involved in a number of cases that he's been hearing where there's been a race relations thing. The accused has been black or non-white, maybe more to the point, but has been black, and they have a custom, these people, that they haven't really evolved, much at all in the last 20,000 years. And even though they've been exposed to first world sort of behaviour and economies and technology for over 200 years, they're still really living the tribal mentality of 20,000 years ago, Stone Age tribal mentality. So they've got different attitudes to things than say other people do. Now, this could include really much of the Pacific Islander people, the Australian Aborigine, the various islands sort of around New Guinea and around there. That's to the north of Australia, and so they've got their laws are built around tribes and tribal elders. And for some reason, a bit like the blacks in North America or in Britain, they really struggle to have this concept of there's an independent public service body like the police or the courts, and the authority lies with them. This idea of having an independent arbiter who sifts the facts and looks at the evidence and makes decisions, they just can't seem to grasp that. And they're told, of course, through the school system and education system and popular media, and through the armies of social worker activists that run around these people and flock to them like flies to shit. These social justice activists, or social worker activists rather, tell them, look, the law is white man law. The courts are white man courts. You don't have to listen to those fucking Nazis. You are not obligated to those laws, and the laws they craft are illegitimate. They're racist. They're keeping you down. They're oppressing you. How come you don't have a waterfront property with hot blonde chicks and a fucking Maserati in the driveway? It's because those fucking white Nazis are keeping you down, and that's proof that their laws are not legitimate. So this sort of activism, which whips them up into a frenzy, these because they're simple enough to go, yeah, that's why I don't have a waterfront property. Too fucking right. So they have no real comprehension of this anyway. So it's a very ideological sort of take on things, of course, but the judge actually works in concert with the tribal elders, using a liaison person. And the idea is to keep social tensions to a minimum. Now, if it means that the black person committed a crime, that any white person will be sent to prison for, they're too concerned that if they imprison the black person, that will create tribal tensions or tensions within that community, and that those tensions may spill out into mob violence, rioting, or whatever the case may be. So the way to keep that violence or to minimize the risk of such mob violence is simply not to put the black person in prison, is not to convict them. So we've got a parallel system of justice here, given that one group in society can't behave and don't accept the authority of the courts and the police, which they clearly don't, then the solution is simply not to apply that authority. It's not to apply the law to them. You apply the law to those the white people, but you don't apply the law to the so if it's presumed you do respect the law and you're going to behave, then the full force of the law will be put upon you. But if it's deemed that you don't respect the law and you won't behave, then who cares? We don't need to worry about applying the law to those people. Now, this is very much the multicultural story, really, that particularly over the last 20 odd years. And again, this is part of the globalist project to destabilize Western society, but to say, well, the laws do apply to this group, but not that group. Now, that it's happening if it happened at a political level or an activist level, you go, oh, okay, well, I suppose that's maybe, it's undesirable, but it's perhaps not surprising. But it's now happening at a judicial level. So the judge is talking and sitting down with tribal elders and the liaison officers. I'm paraphrasing here. This is and say, okay, well, I won't put this black murderer in prison because they only murdered another black person. So we don't have to really get too excited at this, or they only murdered or they only stole from another black person or something like that. So they'll put it in some wider, sort of socio-cultural context, rather than to say, was the law broken or not? Is the evidence to prove that this person did or did not break the law? So all that's out the window. The facts, the evidence kind of don't really matter anymore. The police have brought charges. They're in court. The evidence is pretty damning, so we can't just ignore it and pretend it's not there. But what we can do is we can turn this into a social solution rather than a legal solution, legal being, as in going to prison. So we'll turn it to social. So we'll talk to the tribal elders. Tribal elders will solemnly say they'll keep this young guy, this is mostly the young guys, we'll keep this young guy in check. We'll make sure he doesn't get drunk or take drugs, or he doesn't get, we'll keep an eye on him. We'll keep it under control. But so the guy gets very open-ended. The convicted person gets a sort of an open-ended, good behaviour bond, suspended sentence type thing, and is treated in what can only be described as very lenient conditions. Maybe they do weekend detention or something, and then they're released during the week, and they're released into the care of these tribal elders. Now, the brown or black person will respect, for the most part, the tribal elders, and if they don't, it'll bring terrible shame and whatnot upon their family and their relatives. So they're much more likely to respond positively to that. But the tribal elders themselves are hardly perfect, and the control they have over this person maybe isn't as good as or as effective rather as it would be if they were in prison. So anyway, this is just an example of how the rule of law, due legal process, and punishments, jurisprudence generally, is being diluted. Now we see it, as ideological law creeps into all sorts of different areas of law. I mean, it's already been in divorce law for a long time, but it's in rape law now, where the assumption is they're moving very quickly towards the model of the assumption if she accuses him, no matter how flimsy the evidence, then the entire burden of proof then swings over to him. He has to prove he didn't do it. She doesn't have to prove he did, or even provide a reasonable case that he did. She only needs to prove that he was sort of in the same building at around the same time. But she can even say, well, I don't know when it happened. I don't know how it happened. No, I don't know who else was there. I can't remember the address. No, I don't know the day, and still bring the matter to court. And yet he is then required to disprove what? There's no date or time or place. How do you disprove something like that? So ideological law is creeping into all sorts of things, and that's just simply one example of it. Now, that doesn't necessarily affect me. It's in a rural area of I won't mention the place, but it's in a rural area, so it's not something that affects me or directly concerns me. but it does concern me in as much as it's taken thousands of years of legal evolution to get to the stage we got to. Independent courts, independent judges, that are not subject to political pressure, not directly anyway. Courts of appeal, the rules of evidence, the codification, clear codification of laws, an objective, a police force that is not an apolitical police force, and so on and so forth. And all these, now this is the result. This is not just something that came out of the sky yesterday. This is the result of thousands of years of legal evolution. It's the result of having gone through the Salem witch trials and learnt the lessons from it. It's having gone through the Spanish Inquisition. It's having gone through the McCarthy era and the persecution of communists or suspected communists. So it's every instance throughout history where the rule of law, due legal process, politicized law, where the law was subverted for political or ideological ends, and that severe injustices were done, or even the separation of powers, where Oliver Cromwell, after the English Civil War, when he heavied his fellow parliamentarians to vote for the execution of the king. And I mean, he had his reasons and everything like that, but just putting that, they were effectively heavy to say, you got to vote for the execution of the king. And this is quite acceptable. We need to do this as a practical measure, so let's just do it. Screw the evidence. Let's just go ahead and do it. That sort of thing. Now, that was a direct, in my view, that was a direct interference with due legal process, and it was one of the lessons learned which brought about in England the separation of powers. The court must be independent and separate from the body politic, something that the American founders were very serious about and believed to be central to the protection of democracy. So that's having sort of said, let's sort of have a look at these, because I think in my cognizance we're returning or going back to the days of the witches, Salem witch or other witch trials. Salem is one of the better known, but there were others. Of the witch trials. Now, we had a situation, and I'll start with, say, the Inquisition, which is late 1400s onwards, I guess, and it was around the idea that people were straying from the good and true sort of religious path of the Catholic Church, and this could include a Jew. Particularly after the reunification of Spain, this could include Jews and Muslims or people who were, not sufficiently devout or pious. So the idea was, if you weren't, I'm simplifying this by quite a lot actually, but the idea was if you weren't, super pious and devout, that you may very well be a disciple of the devil. Now, the view at the time was that the devil is everywhere. The devil's henchmen are everywhere. The devil's goons are everywhere. A bit like white supremacists. They're everywhere. So the devil's henchmen are everywhere. So really the law, our practice of the law has to reflect not only the power of the devil, which is substantial and very powerful, but that his goons and henchmen are just everywhere. They're under every fucking bed and in every closet. So because of that, because of the awesome power and the omnipresence of the devil's goons, we can't really stay with the rules. The rules restrain us. The rules hold us back from fighting the devil. So really, we have to dispense with these rules. I mean, and if we step outside the rules and step outside the law or whatever codified law there was at the time, we step outside that, then that's justified because we're stopping the devil. We're stopping the devil. We're upholding goodness, and so we just have to break a few eggs on this. And if a few innocent people get chewed up in the process, who cares? Who cares? Because we're stopping the devil. The bigger picture here is we have to stop the devil. And sure, there'll be a few people trampled underfoot in the process, but who cares? So they went through a series. This is in Inquisition. They went through a series of anyone could inform on anybody. So you could say, well, hey, Billy Bob didn't go to church on Sunday, or at prayer time, I walked past Billy Bob's place and he wasn't praying. So, oh, holy fuck! Well, he's in league with the devil. Holy shit! So Billy Bob would then be dragged in by the Inquisition for questioning. Now, the burden of proof was reversed. So Billy Bob had to prove he was not in league with the devil, and the evidence: we didn't go to church on Sunday. Well, I was ill, or I busted my ass on the way, or my horse was ill, and I was waiting for the horse doctor to come. Whatever. Well, that's no good. No, you didn't go to church because you're in league with the devil. That's what it was, Billy Bob, you motherfucker. So Billy Bob it's okay. Well, we'll torture you. You have to confess that you're Congress with the devil. So we're going to torture the living shit out of you until you confess. Now, under torture, which was, they were certainly imaginative when it came to delivering methods of torture. They don't want to kill you. They want to keep you alive long enough that you make the big confession, but you may end up with broken bones and a busted ass and everything else. So Billy Bob gets the crap tortured out of him, and just to stop the pain, he goes, yeah, okay, fuck me, I'm in league with the devil, yeah, I did it, a million leagues with the devil. There you go, we knew it. And then they could burn Billy Bob at the stake. So the idea was that the rules protect the devil but limit those that are pursuing the devil. So we just have to step outside the rules. And any rules that were made by or under circumstances that weren't pious in the extreme were not legitimate, because they prevented you from going after the devil and chasing the devil's henchmen that are everywhere. Around every corner is the devil's henchman. So we have to be extreme, energetic. We have to step outside the rules. We have to accept that the law just isn't enough to get the devil, and we have to just make up things as we go along. Reverse burden of proof, torture, and so on and so forth. So now these things later, or even at the time, but particularly later, horrified many people looking at it, whether it be legal practitioners or others. And when things calmed down a bit and more sober heads prevailed, they were able to say, look, this was tyrannical in the extreme. This was going beyond the pale. This was outrageous. You had no proof that the devil's henchmen were everywhere. You had no proof that the devil was in Congress, that these people were in Congress with the devil, and you just made it up and reversed the burden of proof and proved that you weren't. So they almost guaranteed an outcome where the persecutors could always get a conviction under those sort of conditions, without realizing that in fact they weren't pursuing the devil at all. They were engaging in extreme tyrannical behavior and terrifying the living shit out of the populace, which maybe was one of the key things. Now, moving to, say, the Salem witch trials, it was pretty much the same playbook, which it usually is in tyranny, by the way, when they want to reverse the burden of proof and use lawfare to go after the citizenry, because you have to step outside the rules and you have to forget about codified law. Reversing the burden of proof is always what tyrants do. Always they will do this. Every time. So when these witch trials came along, there was younger women initially who had I think one of them had like epilepsy or something like that, and that was the devil, and so there were things being attributed to the devil that were, again, a huge stretch, but given the prevailing sort of attitudes at the time was that and this was in the 1600s or the later 1600s, that the devil's henchmen, the practices of the devil was everywhere. Evil, the devil. and that any measure, no matter how extreme, to fight back against the devil was justified. It's the devil! It's the devil! We have to fight the devil! And so they engaged in practices that you look at, holy fuck, you morons. So again, the same pattern, reversing burden of proof, stepping outside the rules, ignoring codified law, and engaging in arbitrary arrest, informants saying, hey, psst, psst, psst. Billie Jean down the road, there's was having sex with demons who are the henchmen of the devil. Oh, holy fuck! Arrest Billie Jean, torture the shit out of her. So these were the things. I mean, contrary to popular belief, there was only women who were being persecuted in the Salem witch trials. That's simply not true. There were many men, brothers and uncles and cousins, husbands. People living in the same household. Many men were killed. They had a thing called pressing at the time, when they put someone underneath like a sort of a heavy wooden door, one of the heavy doors, and then they put rocks on it, heavy rocks on it until confess, and until such a time as the person was killed, and this was, again, it's called pressing. That was the favoured way of treating men who were supposed to have witnessed, some devil act, and so they were trying to extract a confession from them by torture. It's interesting that many of these men wouldn't give up their sisters or their wives or their cousins, nieces, or something like that. So they would die rather than. So it was, you torture someone to commit perjury, and then say it's fact when you use it in court. I mean, it's insane, but there you go. Now, but those were the attitudes of the time. Well, sure, the rules matter. Yeah, okay. The facts matter. Yeah, we concede all that. But we're fighting the devil. We can't use the rules because the devil will win if we do that. And so it's white supremacist Nazis. And this is the sort of mindset that overcomes these people. Now, coming now to a more modern one, which is the McCarthy era. Now, this is sort of where Joseph McCarthy, the junior senator from Wisconsin, where he was quite a big wheel in ferreting out communists in the public service in the United States. Now, the problem with the McCarthy era was that some of these people were brought to trial in a court of law, by the way. Some were exonerated, some convicted. But the thing is, McCarthy had a committee, I think it was, going off the top of my head here, the House Committee on Un-American Affairs or something like that it was called. But he had a committee where he could name names. So he could say, well, Billy Bob's a communist. And that was enough to have Billy Bob, in what today we would say deplatformed and fired from his job and this sort of thing. Now, whether the person was some were, by the way, but whether a person was a communist or not was almost secondary. The mere fact the person had been named, Billy Bob's a communist, the mere fact the person had been named was enough to, again, have them deplatformed and fired from their job. Now, there was, which when it comes back to the sort of the Jewish homosexual Marxist connection here, many of the activists, not all, but many of the activists that were named or were part of the lists, if you like, of the committee, were or had been activists of one sort or another, whether they were screaming communists or acting out some sort of communist plots, another matter. But some of them, for example, say during the Great Depression, there was a lot of casting around for saying, well, capitalism isn't working. Look at the situation in the Great Depression. We're all screwed here. Capitalism's not working. Is there another way of running an economy and running a society? And other things like fascism or communism or various grades and colours of socialism were considered and debated, and there were various town hall meetings, meetings in the local sort of Boston Common or something like that, where people were looking or considering at these things. A lot of them were done around, say, soup kitchens and bread lines and things like that, where people were congregating anyway. So we're looking at people who were doing it pretty tough, and they were coming along and listening to, we need a society where everybody's equal. Now, if you're on the bones of your ass and you can't get enough to eat, and the transient labouring population was particularly hard hit in the United States, more so than a lot of other places, but they were queuing in the breadline. They were starving people. They own nothing. They're dressed in rags type thing. And someone says, hey, why don't we have a society where everyone's equal, not where some people have a lot and some people have none. Let's have one where everyone has the same amount. That would have a lot of appeal to you if you were there. Now, a lot of the activists or budding activists in and around that movement were Jewish. Many were homosexual or lesbian. And so there was an over-representation of Jewish people in that act, as there typically is in these things, by the way. And Marxism has a natural attraction to a lot of Jewish people, particularly Jewish homosexuals and lesbians for some reason, because of this idea of everybody is sort of forced equal, then we'll never be persecuted or picked on again because everyone's equal and the same and so on. So it's an ideology that has a natural appeal for people that are schooled and educated in every generation on how badly persecuted they've been by those evil Christian Gentiles. So anyway, so McCarthy was naming these people, and they came from the usual suspects where you see them today: teachers' unions, academia, Hollywood, the script writers, and it's exactly the same as it is today. You look at all the central casting people that are pushing the globalist project and all this thing, they're all the same people that back then were pushing for international communism and Marxism and so on. Now, where McCarthy, I think where it went off the rails was that McCarthy could name these people and they would be persecuted, whether they were communists, or some were, or whether they were communists or not, or whether they'd done anything or not. Even if they were communists of the first order, even if they were, sabotaging or subverting, the US or something like that, they still should be brought into a court of law and bring the evidence into independent court of law, and that evidence must be tested by their attorneys, and if guilty of breaking the law, then mete out the punishments that are appropriate to the law, clearly codified law, not made up arbitrary ideological bullshit, but clearly. But this went beyond that. This McCarthy era went beyond that. Many of these people, in fact, most of them, were not dragged in front of a court. They were simply accused via this committee, and suffered accordingly without due legal process. So that was where that fell down. Due legal process was the issue, and that was bypassed by using this. And there were employers, many of them, who acted on this being named by McCarthy in the media or on TV when he was doing the Un-American committee activities. And he'd say, well, Billy Bob's a communist and Jimmy Jack's a communist, Billie Jean's a communist, and so on. And that they could be and were persecuted because of that. Many were ruined by it and committed suicide. Such was the level of ruination and the impossibility of them ever getting employment again in and their friends wouldn't be talking to them and this sort of thing. So that was where people could be named without the right to defend themselves because they weren't allowed the due legal process system was bypassed. But that was condemned, that McCarthy was condemned for, among other things, for those reasons. Now, the revenge of the lesbian Jewish Marxists still continues to this very day. And that wound of the 1950s or late 1940s, 1950s still runs deep and is red raw and scratched at continually by that diaspora and by the communist lesbians type thing. But it was a failing of the system that they weren't permitted due legal process. And it was a failing of the system where if somebody fired them, say their employer fired these people, for being named by this committee, if their employer fired them, the state should have intervened, say, hey, you don't fire that person or conduct any vendetta against them until it's been proven in a fucking court of law that they have in fact committed crimes, and then it's up to the court to punish them in accordance with the clearly codified law. Now that was then, but and I think for whatever failings it had, from sort of that time up until the advent, I suppose, at the beginning, if you took it sort of outside of the divorce court industry, which again was purely ideological, or quickly became so. The justice system functioned for its faults, and it had them. Justice system functioned probably the best it has ever functioned in human history. Independent courts and judges, clearly codified law by an independent sovereign lawmaking body, and a non-politicized police force, and so on. And it was facts and evidence, due legal process, rules of evidence that decided. Not every single case, again, it's had its faults, but that was the high point of. Now we're going back to the days of the Salem witch trials. But why do I say that? I say because ideology is replacing facts, as it did in that example I gave at the beginning of this essay. And we see it now quite widespread. That particularly in the mass migration, the people coming into the West are being told by our own educators and by our own social workers and activists that the law is white man's law. It's not legitimate. You don't have to take any notice of it. So if something happens you don't like, well, go and have a riot. Ransack every business, burn buildings down. You have a right to do it because that law isn't justified. It's white man's law. You're being oppressed and held back by those evil fascist Nazis. Now you've got people like Joe Biden and Merrick Garland and in the United States and other people who are constantly making speeches about white supremacy, fascist, neo-Nazis, and their FBI employees are being dressed up in neo-Nazi uniforms and being sent to parade around for the cameras. FBI fucking employees. Can you believe it? That's the insanity of our times. And so we're looking at a situation now where, and if you look at the people from January 6th that were just arbitrarily arrested, arbitrarily held in detention, fuck habeas corpus, and then were given, outrageously punitive sentences. We're going back, I think, to that time where you're a neo-Nazi, you're in league with the devil, we can do whatever we want because the fight against neo-Nazis, white supremacists, they're just everywhere. We got to get them. Anything is acceptable in the pursuit of convicting and getting these people. And if we've got to invent a few stories or invent a few incidents or false flags or get FBI employees to run around pretending, who cares? Because we're fighting Hitler. And that attitude has come back. And if anything we've learned in the sweep of history is you don't do that. So we're heading back to the situation of I would allege, of absolute tyranny, because as soon as you move away from the rules, as soon as you say, well, we don't have to abide by the rules because the fight is just so huge, then you're out of already you've taken the first big step into the tyranny of the state. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.